Great. All right, I think we can start. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us again to the BioTools Innovator Live webinar series. Every Wednesday during the summer, we hold a webinar series bringing together industry experts to talk about major topics and interesting topics in the growth and success of early stage startups. BioTools Innovator, for those of you who are not familiar with the accelerator, is an accelerator and competition focused on the growth and success of life science tools companies and diagnostics. And so this is our second year in operation. And we are joined here today by our panelists and moderator, which I'll introduce shortly, and let you take it away from here. So hi, Catherine. Catherine is the managing director at BioTools Innovator, and will be moderating the panel today. So I'll let you kick it off.
Great, thank you, Ayelet. So I'm excited to see everybody here for another exciting topic. Again, we're going to be discussing product development and manufacturing, and I have three excellent panelists joining me today. So let me start by introducing Ulrike. So Ulrike is with Eppendorf. Ulrike, if you want to tell us about yourself and maybe where your organization fits as far as product development and manufacturing.
Absolutely. So thanks for having me today. So I originally actually started out scouting for new technologies, really early stage technologies, usually not much more than a patent, and really thinking about how to generate a prototype or really get to a proof of concept. And then I moved later in exploring market opportunities across many different industries for rather established technologies. And now I'm for several years full force in product management, thinking about new product development, repositioning products. And currently I work for Eppendorf on the commercial end of product management, so not much of new product development, but I lead our team of commercial product managers for everything that Eppendorf sells for lab equipment and all kinds of products. And Eppendorf does also have the adventure arm looking into breakthrough innovations and also thinking about strategic partnerships or investing into startups. But I'm really on the commercial end and heavily in product management.
Great. Well, great to have you here. Let's go to our next panelist, Norio. Norio is with Nissan Chemical Corporation, one of our sponsors of BioTools Innovator. Norio, if you want to give us an introduction about yourself and about your company.
Thank you for this opportunity. Our company, Nissan Chemical, is a Japanese medium-sized chemical company. And my position is business development. I'm seeking the collaboration and the investment opportunities in the United States. Our company has several activities. For example, the CDMO side, we have a CDMO for the protein peptide and also the small molecules. And also we have some of the new business development related to the material based. We have some of the cell culture related materials. This case is like a startup. We do not have a manufacturing activities internally. So we have both cases. Sometimes we are conducting the contract out manufacturing, and also sometimes out the contract out manufacturing to the especially in the Japanese CDMOs. Thank you.
Great to have you here, especially joining us from Japan today. And lastly on our panel, we have Cheryl Goodwin from Jabil Healthcare, which has been a supporter of MedTech Innovator for a couple of years now. So just Cheryl.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to speak today. And as you mentioned, Jabil Healthcare is who I'm working for. Jabil is a full service end-to-end contract manufacturer. So Jabil is about a $30 billion company spanning many different markets, but our healthcare space in particular is about $5 billion. and I operate as a business unit leader in our precision medicine customers within diagnostics. So although I get to participate in much of the med tech work that we do as well, my customers in particular generally are in point of care and point of need molecular diagnostics, liquid biopsy, and next generation sequencing. And so that's kind of the core space that my team works in. And with our customers, we'll do full scale, high volume manufacturing. But we also partner with customers who are looking still in the development phase to incorporate particularly ideas about design for manufacturing, design for assembly, processes like that. So we'll get involved early in the relationship to help them in that process, and before we scale it into a manufacturing opportunity. So we're excited to talk to you guys today.
Excellent. Well, I think this is a really broad panel, so I'm very excited to jump in. One of the things that we like to do is kind of, before we get into the details, kind of talk about like the environment that's happening. So over the last couple of years, I think supply chain has been top of mind for a lot of folks. So I'm going to start with you, Cheryl. Maybe, talk a little bit about how you guys have dealt with supply chain. Are you swapping out products? How are you mitigating potential suppliers going out? And lastly, are you seeing trends in how companies are designing? Are they doing more off the shelf versus custom nowadays?
Yeah, definitely. So with respect to design for design for manufacturability and assembly has always been a key part of our business. And really within that is design for supply chain. And so Jabil uses a model associated with risk identification. So making sure that components have alternates, for example, is a huge piece of our focus in the product development stage of the life cycle, making sure that we're designing in alternates and designing in, even if it's a same, for example, a mechanical part, designing in a secondary supplier, making sure that we have more than one source for each one of the critical components. I would say that even in the quote unquote off the shelf components, we're not seeing as much flexibility in the supply chain today. So even if it's custom or off the shelf, we definitely see the need for alternates and see that kind of being our strongest play with our customers. And that can happen, obviously, once a product is already designed. It's just a little more cumbersome than to go through a verification process. So we hopefully help with the customers and getting that in front end. The other thing that we're seeing more of is regionalization. And so looking for more regionalized suppliers to our manufacturing or design locations, because we definitely see there being an ability to have more flexibility.
Well, I think we lost Cheryl and her thought there, and that's okay. I think that was good. There was a lot of good nuggets there. Ulrika, I'll turn to you. Anything you want to add about the supply chain?
Yes, I would like to add something. Of course, COVID has really changed our view on supply chains. But I think there are certain principles that are true pre-pandemic anyway. Cheryl just pointed out to have regional development partners, but I think this is important anyway. You want to have a really close contact to your developers, especially in the early stages. You need to be in close contact to be able to talk to people quickly. So actually, this didn't change with COVID at all.
Good, and we have Cheryl back. I think we got some great nuggets from you, Cheryl, and Ulrika added a little bit more, just re-emphasizing the importance of those regional development partners. Norio, before we go on, I'll let you weigh in. How have you guys approached supply chain? Have you guys had any issues that you've had to weather?
Yeah, our company case is we are manufacturing our product in Japan. So under the pandemic, the shipment from Japan to US, or it takes more time. And also the one of the difficulty for us is the lack of the single-use products for the manufacturing as well. So, but so it's very difficult to control the manufacturing. It's very difficult to say, but how to control such kind of the off-the-shelf strategy from the cost effectiveness and also the other type of the issues.
Noria, would you say things look to be getting better, or are you still kind of experiencing some of those supply chain issues?
So far it's okay. The shipment is relatively regular before COVID. So far.
Good. Okay, well, let's move into talking about more about product development and manufacturing. Many of the companies that we work with start as a service, and now they're trying to productize. And so maybe, Cheryl, I'll start with you. You know, what are kind of the first steps to productizing? You know, how do they take something from, you know, I guess what they have and designed for manufacturing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from our perspective, one of the important kind of transitions there as we move from a concept into a product that's ready maybe for what we might consider design freeze, where we could do some level of verification on that, would be to know what level of sustainability the product has itself. So oftentimes, particularly in our space, what we see with respect to that movement is much dependent on the reagent or the buffer solution, lyophilized product, as part of needing a stability there to kind of move into a more comprehensive kind of productized solution. And so that's often for Jabil, honestly, not our core competency, right? That typically stays as the core competency of our customer. And so what we like to do in terms of being product ready, if you will, is make sure that the consumable or the instrument is also ready for kind of that scaled usage. And much of that comes in line with saying how frequent are we able to repeat and get, you know, repeatable, reproducible results with respect to the product. Definitely, you know, there is a full verification expectation, but knowing that we've gotten through a level of serious DOEs and understand the use cases of the product is really important for us to be able to kind of lock in a manufacturing strategy around it. And so I would say that's kind of the turning point for us, is when kind of a lab solution, kind of something that's produced in hundreds or thousands of units, is getting those repeatable, reproducible results so that we can kind of shift into thinking about how we would do that at scale.
Great. And Noria, switching over to you, you know, you talked a little bit about how you guys approach things as a startup. So when you guys are getting ready to, you know, launch a new product or something, how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, the depending on the product, our strategy different, I think. Recently, we are conducting some of the material for the cell culture, the cell therapy field. In this case, the robust manufacturing is one of the difficulties. So from the process development, we are considering about the design species. So during the validations.
And similarly, Ulrike, I know you talked about how you're kind of on more the commercial side, but you do some like repositioning of products. And so do you guys have to go back and kind of redesign those, rethink about how they're going to be productized?
I mean, I would add that basically the thinking about the product starts really at the very beginning. You have a problem and you think about, how can I resolve this problem? this is always at the beginning, no matter whether you really start out with the very first product or whether you are going to add to your product line. You always have to think about how can I resolve this the best, and then the whole product journey starts from there, to think about the concept, to go through a development phase, to think about how to test it, etc. So the whole life cycle starts really early on when you think about what is the problem that we resolve. And the sharper you have the problem, the easier it is also to specify what are you going to target and what you really have to achieve with your product. And I would argue that even for a service, you would think in a similar way, because you still have to think about how is it going to create value for a customer, how you are going to position this. All of this is basically the same, and it starts right at the beginning with the problem you are going to resolve.
Great. And I guess, Cheryl, I want to get back to you and talk about, so, you've got kind of your product. How do you get into the kind of the small scale manufacturing? Like at what inflection point does that come into play?
Yeah. So I love Ulrike's response too from that perspective, right? The inputs, knowing the inputs before we get to the outputs is so important with respect to, are we meeting the need of what we intend to design and then manufacture. So I think for us, the kind of the inflection point typically comes earlier the better, right? We definitely operate under a fail fast motto at Jabil. We want to be able to take something and put it into a product as soon as possible. Thankfully, there's tons of methodologies today to be able to create things in a small scale kind of quick turn environment, whether or not it's kind of an additive manufacturing environment. We're working a lot today with materials that are much more similar to like injection molded plastics in a 3D printing environment than we were just a couple years ago. And so making sure that we're getting hands-on product as soon as possible is definitely a big piece of that puzzle, and not being afraid to kind of move through that process quickly so that issues can be identified. And I think the second part of that is also finding a partner who's capable of working in that kind of scaled space. So one of the reasons that Jabil works in the product development space as well as the manufacturing space is because we want to be able to help our customers find solutions quickly in a lab-based environment. So whether that's internal, managing your own supply chain with kind of quick Protoshop environments, or whether or not that's finding a partner who can do that flexibility to be able to produce units quickly, we find a ton of value in. And we don't often do some of that stuff ourselves. We'll rely on external third parties that make a quick turn tool, whereas we'll make more of the manufacturing tool, and we'll definitely propose to our customers to do that. We're not always the right solution in terms of all of their equipment or mold tooling solutions.
Can I maybe just add one thought to Cheryl? I think what is really helpful, and I'm pretty sure you would second that, is really to bring in manufacturing early. Do not wait too long. It doesn't help to have great ideas and then to go on and even have a prototype. Then you go to the manufacturing phase and they say, sorry, but that's not going to work. So having that engagement early on in the stages, even if it takes quite some time to get there, has been really useful for my experience.
Great. No, great responses from both of you. And I think, Cheryl, you brought up a good segue into our next section, which is talking about partnerships. So how do you go about identifying the right development partner? What are some of the biggest differentiators, I guess, besides cost? So I guess, Cheryl, we'll start with you.
Great. Yeah. So I definitely think, capability is the number one differentiator that we believe is important in a partner. And from a capability perspective, that often means someone who has a bit of a track record producing development engagement or manufacturing engagement similar to what you're working on. It's never going to be a one-for-one, and we wouldn't want that to be the case, right? But someone who has some expertise in that space in particular. One of the reasons that Jabil kind of formulates our business the way we do around market segments is that we're now developing capabilities that are applicable for example, a next-gen sequencing product that could be very similarly applied in some of the point-of-care molecular products that we're working on as well. And so we like to see that level of kind of capability match. But then secondarily, I think culture match is really important too. And that culture match comes, it can look different depending on the environment. You know, Jabil is a very large company, and we have certain expectations with respect to the companies we work with, but we also try and partner specifically with companies who are in the cutting edge of technologies. And so we have to partner with those companies differently, and we recognize that to be the case, and try and be culturally aware of the fact that you know, someone who is, you know, another $10-20 billion company in the market isn't going to operate the same way that some of our new startup kind of partners are. And so making sure that we have a cultural fit with respect to our team and who's working on the product. And even that cultural fit can come in with respect to regionalization. It could be that having that close connection and that ease of communication is really helpful in that stage. And so we would never choose to separate those teams, particularly at the design stage, unless we have to.
That's great. And I think it comes full circle to what Ulrike said earlier too about regionalization when you were off. So I'm glad to see that advice coming up twice. Ulrike, maybe do you want to add something from what your experience has been with selecting the right development partner?
Yeah, Cheryl just also mentioned it a little bit. I think it's also good to think about how far do you want to go with that partner. It's a difference whether you have somebody who helps you develop a product versus somebody who can actually manufacture it for you down the road. And if they do, it's a good question to ask how scaling might look like. So just that you know in which frame you are going to work down the road. I think that might also be a good conversation quite at the beginning.
And Norio, you know, thinking off of some of the points that Cheryl brought up, you know, about, you know, capabilities being important. I think you mentioned that Nissan Chemical, your guys's bread and butter capabilities is around protein, peptide, and small molecules. You know, what are some other kind of differentiators, or what, you know, why would companies come to you guys to partner?
Yeah, so especially the pharmaceutical cases, the experience for the regulatory point of view is very important. How to manage all of the cGMP manufacturing. So our case is one of the strengths is some of the product already into the market, and how to control such kind of regulatory point of view.
And keeping with you, Norio, you know, how do you guys decide, you know, what you guys are going to do in-house versus partnering or outsourcing with another group?
Yeah, that is the difference bit among the what kind of product developing. So it's very difficult to say. There is some of the know-how to manufacture. Such kind of case, we would like to conduct in-house. Some of the more bulk manufacturing cases, we would like to contract out to decrease the cost.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a typical kind of startup mentality for some of the things you talked about, you know, like cost is a big factor, right?
Yeah.
Cheryl, do you want to add on, and, you know, when to think about keeping things in-house versus outsourcing?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, in any engagement we're working on, we like to think about where our core competencies are versus our customers. And so there's a lot of instances where for us, like, our customer maintains that relationship primarily with the actual chemical side of the business or biological side of the business, where they're managing that directly with a third partner, and we're maybe manufacturing and integrating it, but not involved more so on the front end. I think the other piece of it is definitely in the flexibility. And so that also comes back to the previous question. You know, we often work, for example, with customers who use does what I'll call loosely a design house to help in the product development stage. And there are design houses that are really great about integration with a manufacturing partner, and they're used to that kind of third party kind of environment and working all together. And so that's also a really comfortable space for us to think about, whether it's a design house or another partner. Jabil's expectation is not necessarily that we have to do everything, but that we partner with other suppliers and companies that our customers are working with in order to do integration. And that's very typical. In my career, I've often worked with my competitors, where my competitor is doing the instrument and our team is doing the consumable, and you know, we're working on the same team together. So again, I think it kind of comes back to that same conversation of capability and culture, and not feeling the need to go with a one-stop shop, even though there's definitely big organizations like the one I work for who can do more of it. It's not necessarily always the right solution.
And then I guess, Ulrike, like turning over to you to think about Eppendorf's approach. You know, how do you guys decide what you guys want to tackle, kind of in-house, or, you know, kind of outsource or partner maybe with the startup instead?
I mean, for Eppendorf itself, we have a lot of in-house manufacturing. And certainly if you have in-house manufacturing, it also means in general that you have more control. What's going to happen if some things go not really the right way. So the control aspect and the mitigation of risk is, of course, much stronger with any in-house manufacturing. In general, I think when you have outsourcing or a third party that is going to manufacture something for you, Cheryl used another word, and that was core competence. Think about where your strength is as a company to make that decision, and where you want to be also growing in your competence over the next couple of years. And that might be something that you don't want to give out. And you don't want to transfer that knowledge. So that might be another aspect to make that decision, what to keep in-house and what to outsource, and basically free up some resources.
That's a good segue to the next topic, which is about intellectual property. So, you know, when you are engaging in these relationships, you know, who owns the IP? Cheryl, I guess you had the most experience here, so let's go to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jabil's model is always that our customers pay for design engagements, and therefore through that payment, they are paying for the design IP. So there is an expectation across the board, and it's really one of the reasons why design for us is a unique and standalone piece of our business offering, because a customer doesn't have to use our manufacturing services to use our design services, because they're discretely paying for those design services, but then retaining the design IP that's coming out of it. There might be some exceptions for us with respect to process IP, where we're developing a manufacturing process to make the product that has unique IP. And if that's the case, the customer is fully aware of that during the process. But yeah, definitely from a design perspective, we delineate that very clearly by the cost of ownership, right? So the cost of ownership for us is with the customers, and therefore they retain that IP. I will say that that can be a bit unique in an engagement where, you know, we get very deeply involved in the design versus one where we're really doing more DFX, DFA kind of products. But either way, our expectation is that it's customer IP. The flip side of that is that the customer is then also responsible for all of that IP obligation with respect to filings, and the kind of onus is also on them.
That's great. Ulrike, do you have anything to add in terms of IP?
I mean, I think in general, it's definitely a very important point to address in the agreement. So who's going to own what, who's going to bring in which kind of IP into a relationship like this. I have seen that also to have something completely outsourced and the IP was completely with the third party. So all kinds of combinations are possible. Most important is to think about this upfront and really capture this also in the agreement so that it's clear in which direction you are going to march.
And Cheryl, I want to go back to you on something you brought up, which was about process IP. So if you do have, develop a new product, process, and IP, then if a company, so then does a company need to stay with you then to continue in manufacturing? Like, how do they build that redundancy? I know that you guys are a huge company, so unlikely to go out of business, but.
Yeah, so it certainly does increase our stickiness. So we do like that process when we have some IP associated with the manufacturing. But generally speaking, I would say that that process IP tends to be for they have to be very unique processes. So not something that is becoming more broadly used in the environment today. An example I can think of in the non-healthcare space is, Jabil vertically integrated a technology that our customer was actually using before they came to us, and then we continued to use that unique process that we had then acquired, and therefore had that IP as part of it. And if there were an instance where, for example, a customer wanted to bring something in-house or to take that closer to home, there could be licensing of that IP that would be necessary. And so, that's definitely, again, part of a bit of the advantage for Jabil if we do have some invested IP in it from a process perspective. But, those instances are pretty unique where there's something so specific that we have a specific process IP around it. The majority of the technology that we use today is, generally available and not protected.
And I think that kind of reiterates, something Ulrike also brought up and you have talked about. It's really when you enter into these agreements and these relationships, and make sure you talk about everything up front and there are no surprises as you go along. So there was a question that came in through our Q&A here. So how do BioTools medtech device manufacturers typically price exclusive manufacturing of products and consumables with their partner? Do manufacturers commonly ship or drop ship the final product to customers and offer service contracts? So Cheryl, maybe back to you first.
Yeah, so we definitely will provide offering for any piece of the puzzle. So for us, we can definitely be a manufacturing partner for a component within a device. We can be a manufacturing partner for a full finished good that then gets shipped back to the customer. Or we'll do full configure and build to order environments where we're shipping them directly to the end user directly. So we have all levels of those offerings, which kind of coming back to our service agreement discussion would be part of the contract and what we've agreed to with the customer. So we can kind of, we can make that unique to our customer relationship. For us, I think the level of exclusivity in that process tends to not be relatively restricted. So Jabil is going to be a manufacturing partner where our expectation is that our value is, how you're competitively paying us, that we're providing you enough value that you feel compelled to bid that with us. And we very rarely enter opportunities where a customer hasn't competitively bid everything we're proposing with multiple other contract manufacturers or partners. So my expectation, my preference would be to work with customers who are going through that process, right? They need to know the capabilities that are out there in the competitive market that's there, that actually benefits Jabil, we think, long term, because then if we're providing a unique value in that solution where a customer has chosen us as their partner, it's clear why, you know, we've entered into that arrangement together to begin with. So I definitely think that should be part of the process, right? We should be held to a standard that, you know, is competitively bid in the market. And the other piece of that is that that's often how we end up sometimes working on unique pieces within a total system. Maybe it's sub-assemblies or even the finished instrument, but not the consumable, you know, because when a customer goes through that process, they definitely see unique core competency in one partner and not in the other. And typically that competency also comes across with respect to price.
Right. Well, no, I love that advice, you know, about making sure that your customer is kind of educated. You know, I think even in maybe in our personal lives, they always say, if you're getting a quote, you know, get 3 of them. So you definitely want to not just pick the first person that comes by and make sure you really align on, like you said, some of these factors we've been talking about is, you know, capability and culture and all of that.
Can I add something to this? So actually this goes right in the direction for thinking about or having a discussion about cost and pricing in general, because you have to think about for how much can you actually your product sell. And when you have the conversation internally with your manufacturing about cost, or with your manufacturer, outside manufacturer, about what their pricing to you is, it's really important to understand this and how this is going to develop down the road, because otherwise you are not going to make money. So it's a really important question to address, how your cost will develop and potentially how economies of scale will play in, so that you actually have a viable product or service in the market at the end of the day.
That's an excellent point, Ulrike. I mean, you can't, COGS is something we always ask, right, about, and you really need to make sure there's some kind of profit at the end of the line. Norio, we're going to switch gears a little bit. And I know that you have, you know, with Nissan Chemical, there you've got more of that CDMO experience with CGMP. So maybe, you know, how do you work with companies as far as CGMP? Do you help them with kind of the regulatory side of things?
So I would like to comment about the different point of view on the, for example, the contracted out case. There used to be a, for example, small molecule case. We develop all of the process development internally and submit a patent and just contract out manufacturing to the CDMO to decrease the cost. But recently, for example, the cell therapy case or cell like a case, the CDMO has their special technologies to manufacture something internally already developed. So in this case, we should collaborate or joint development for the manufacturing to more efficiently. So that case is very important for us to shorten the development period. So the same as this, we have some of the CGMP manufacturing experiences, how to develop the efficiently, and also the some of the case of the like peptide manufacturing. We have a cost-effective manufacturing methods. So we would like collaborate with the startups from the early stage because of the manufacturing capability is used for the how to efficient be to the development of the manufacturing.
I think, yeah, that's a really interesting approach, especially, and I'm glad that you brought up a couple of points there. Joint development. I think that's in contrast to what we were talking about with Cheryl, where a little bit, the IP is mostly with the customer there. Joint development agreements are usually, shared IP. So I'm glad you brought that up. Cheryl, I know that Jabil also has some GMP manufacturing capabilities. So, how do you I guess coach, startups on whether they should build that capability in-house or if they should work with somebody else who already has that?
Yeah, I definitely think from a capability perspective, what we have seen more in our spaces today are customers who are developing that GMP really more maybe for testing, product testing, than they are even for manufacturing. And so, we might do the full scale manufacturing of the product, and then the customer is doing the lot release testing on it and maintaining that. And so therefore they're developing their GMP around that piece of the business, which really to a degree requires a full QMS in order to support that. And so that's definitely been the case for us as of late. With respect to kind of the front end side of the business, again, Jabil's, because our model is that we don't own the IP, we also don't do the regulatory filings when required. And therefore, our customers need to be capable and competent in the filing piece of the business. And so even if we're running a full DHF for a customer, maintaining their product with GMP and a QMS, they're still responsible for taking that into the regulatory agency. And so what we see sometimes, and I think is really a flexible and helpful solution, even if you're working with a design house, someone who has the capability to do that full QMS for you, but having more of the regulatory expertise on your side, is definitely a solution that we would champion, because setting up that QMS at the front end isn't necessarily fully necessary, right? We have a turnkey system that you can essentially just say, see Jabil CHF, not in so many words, but that's capable, right? And so I think that's definitely where we would advise our customers, if they're, still growing, to take that line where they maintain regulatory and we maintain quality. Obviously still very closely working hand in hand, but it's an easy way to create that initial differentiation. And then again, we mostly see our customers building up a lot of that quality expertise themselves anyway, because it benefits them later in the process.
I would like to add maybe one thought for that. Obviously, GMP manufacturing is really important. However, maybe another angle also to think about is who are your customer segments? If you have academic use, or if you still have to explore how your products actually will be perceived and accepted in the market, you might go a step too far if you really go right from the beginning and with GMP and everything that you need at some point, but maybe maintaining certain flexibility that helps you to be quick to the market doesn't require GMP at all times. So just think about whether there are opportunities in general in your market segments, how you are going to market with your products.
I guess, and maybe this was a question that anybody could jump in on, like, are there tips or suggestions for cost savings? I think, GMP, I mean, first you have to determine, I think I'll read through this, is what you're saying, is determine if you really need it. And once you do, I guess, how do you save money there? Or is it just, you have to know that this is the route you're going to go and it's going to be very expensive?
Maybe if I start, one of the things that you could think about is the products that you are going to use, your raw materials, so to speak, in the process, where and how are they manufactured, and what kind of certifications are you going to get from your suppliers. That is a good starting point to be on the right track for later on. and having certain certifications already on hand, starting that internal, I would say, early stage quality management process in-house. That would be my recommendation, where you can start to have a good impact without overdoing it, asking your suppliers for these qualities in the materials and any certifications.
I would definitely agree that when you move that into even raw material and component requirements at the beginning, it's easier as you build then to not have to repeat essentially some activities that might be necessary. So, you know, in one we're in a DNA RNA free manufacturing environment. If that wasn't manufactured, for example, one of the plastics that we're bringing in wasn't manufactured in that environment, we're adding on a test later to show that it wasn't introduced at the component level. And so then some of the manufacturing kind of regulations that we're implementing are duplicative, and it's harder to find a root cause if there is an issue, because then where did it come from? So definitely I agree with that sentiment, that the earlier in the stage that can be introduced, the more important it is. And to make those suppliers aware of that, right? So there's times sometimes when we're talking to suppliers and, you know, they're providing a widget, but they don't even know what it's going into eventually, right? And so helping have good contracts even with suppliers, so there's very clear NDAs and confidentiality is protected, but at the same time, making sure that they understand kind of the end use case is really important, we think, because there's definitely some times where they're like, I had no idea that's what we were using that product for. And so eliminating that is definitely helpful.
And for your organization or companies that work with you, do you help with kind of selecting the suppliers and kind of helping the company understand, you know, what to look for?
Yeah, we definitely, I mean, Jabil, I think Jabil would consider our supply chain management to be, you know, one of our other core competencies, and that is selection of suppliers and the process by which we manage those suppliers, including audits and other, you know, practices that we do to ensure that we know that they are producing quality. But oftentimes, if our customer has already engaged with a supplier, you know, and they want to maintain that relationship, getting our team involved to kind of take them into our supplier quality engineering team and say, this is what we would take them through as one of our own suppliers, and kind of pulling them into our system that way, we think is definitely helpful, because again, you know, one of the pieces in our chain that makes it easier is if they've already kind of been into knowing what our expectations are. So, and that also comes back to really early, we talked about that need for multiple suppliers sometimes, right? So oftentimes our customers come in and say, this is who we're using. We say, great, we're going to get another supplier also ready, right? So so that we have a dual source capability, because in any situation, having a single source of a supply chain like that could be risky.
Exactly. And then I want to return to Ulrike about the QMS thing that you brought up. So from a startup perspective, you know, when should they start implementing that? Is it from day one? And is it something that they go to a consultant to help them set up, or bring that in-house? Like, when do they bring that in-house, I guess?
I think consultant will be, in general, very helpful to assess this, or at some point you will need somebody to go through everything. However, I believe that there are steps that you can take from the very beginning, and that is good housekeeping, as simple as it might sound, to make sure that the documentation that you have around your products, where do you store them, and have them always accessible. I mean, at the end of the day, you will have, for the quality management system, where you store your documentation, how accessible is it, how up to date is that stuff. And you can start this early on, simply by having good housekeeping and keeping your documentation very well maintained for all of the products that you are going to develop, the suppliers that you have, the certificates that you are going to get, etc. So there are fairly low-hanging steps that you can take from the very beginning.
Great. And I want to keep going on this, discussion around cost. Noria, let's talk to you a little bit here. What do you guys do to save costs, both in your own internal kind of product development and manufacturing, and then when you're working with your customers as well?
Yeah, for the startup case, we would like to support such kind of process development for the future the collaboration opportunities. It means we have some of the risk sharing the business model. So if a startup would like to collaborate with us continuously, we can develop some of the process development as a risk sharing. So especially using our technologies like peptide manufacturing. And in this case, we would like to have some of the experience to manufacture peptide using our technologies under CGMP for the robust manufacturing in our facilities. And in this case, we would like to conduct such kind of the process development sometimes with no cost. So that is one of the case of the risk sharing collaboration opportunities.
That's great. I mean, I think no cost is a very attractive offering.
Yeah, depending on the business model for the future.
That's great. Cheryl, so, I guess a similar question to you, about cost savings and, how do you kind of help your customers do that, especially when there's, startups at an early stage?
Yeah. So I definitely think Jabil works in an environment of continuous improvement. So our expectation with a product at the very beginning stage, if we're getting involved with development, is to find opportunities to reduce costs. And so once we get something into manufacturing, we obviously reduce those costs by automating processes and removing people, improving quality, et cetera. The same kind of concept really come into play with respect to how we think about development. And so generally speaking, that would be a development engagement where, again, our customer and us are partnering on them executing under their core competencies and us under ours, and not even doing like a full outsourced development engagement. If they have some of those capabilities internally, we would definitely say we should be working together on that rather than just them outsourcing it. That requires a great program manager and making sure that someone is pulling all those pieces together. But again, that's where Jabil would say it's worth your money for us to put a good PM on this program and then use your resources where necessary. Obviously, depending on the engagement, we certainly would look at opportunities for savings with respect to the customer if we were to get into manufacturing or go into a longer development arrangement or a longer partnership arrangement with them, right? So, we don't do design for free, and we won't, from the perspective that we want to make it very clear that the customer's paid for the IP and that's theirs. But, we definitely want to look at development proposals that say, hey, if we get to the stage where we're going to manufacture it, we want to make it a little more worth your while as well. So maybe more like incentives in the development agreement if we got manufacturing, stuff like that. But again, I think the biggest part of the puzzle with respect to cost sensitivity in the beginning of a program is to make sure that the right folks are doing the right things. And that can really be an effective way to reduce costs.
I guess kind of more a specific question, Cheryl, do contract manufacturers require upfront engineering costs for tools, or can they be amortized via the product cost?
Yeah, so Jabil's general model is not to amortize. We tend to use an NRE process where non-recurring expenses are paid up front, our capital is owned by the customer, and then we don't do an amortization. That said, we definitely have unique situations where that's not the case, and we've built it into the business model. And so because all of our business is unique to our customer's business, we can have that flexibility if a customer comes to us and says, hey, we need, essentially to look at a model of this with an amortized injection mold tooling cost, stuff like that, then we can definitely consider that option. I believe that, because Jabil, for example, has, like, we own our SMT lines to make PCBAs, we own our injection mold presses to actually make the parts, and then the customer owns the test fixtures, the mold tools, the unique components that are needed in that manufacturing process. It tends not to be as big of an expense. And so we can make that, arrangement also equitable for the customer. And then we would also encourage that the customer is looking for, deliverables along the payment of that CapEx, right? So if, for example, they were buying a mold tool from us, they should be getting proof of the capability of the mold tool as they're paying for that piece of capital. And, we would definitely want a customer to have that level of expectation.
Great advice. Ulrike, before we leave the subject of cost, is there anything you wanted to add as far as your experience and how to control cost or thinking about cost?
No, at this time, I think Cheryl and Norio already touched on this.
Good, good. So we're just about at the top of the hour. So I'm going to ask just one more question, and then we'll end our public broadcast. I know Norio has to jump off. So Norio, we'll start with you. What are some of the common, I guess, what's some advice that you give to startups when working with Nissan Chemical?
Yeah, our company case is we would like to use our expertise and technologies to go across deliver with startups. We are not a pharmaceutical company, medical device company. We are a chemical company. So that we would like to manufacturing capabilities for the future medical or medical device development. So our company is such kind of collaboration opportunity. It's very flexible. So if you are interested in such kind of the risk sharing collaboration opportunities, I would like to talk with you more details. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Hopefully, no cost risk sharing is a great model. So I'm sure you'll have some takers on that. So Norio, I know you have to jump off. So thank you so much for joining us. So Cheryl and Ulrike, I know you'll stick around. So I will ask you a similar question. So maybe Ulrike, starting with you, what's some advice you give to startups? Maybe thinking about common mistakes that they should avoid.
There may be two things that I would like to bring up. One of them is expect that customer will have questions and there will be product complaints. That's not something to be afraid of or to wonder about this. It's something to accept, plan for it, and listen to customers for it. So that would be one advice. And the other one is to not, when you, for instance, develop a piece of equipment, not to over-engineer the product and to keep in mind who are your customer segments so that you are not go a long, long way and have one size fits all piece of equipment that is too much for one segment and maybe not enough for another. That would be my advice.
Great advice. And Cheryl, from you, so maybe, what common mistakes to avoid? What's kind of the best advice you give to startups?
Yeah, so definitely, we love early engagement, right? So working with a manufacturing partner early in the process, not just to understand the manufacturing process itself, but to understand the risks that kind of get developed during that process. So that's definitely a good piece of advice. I think the other thing is just to be comfortable in an environment where, there will be things outside. Then if you outsource them, for example, that will be managed appropriately by your partner. So I think one of the worst things that we've seen kind of happen sometimes is that a customer will outsource something and then kind of bring in someone on their own team just to manage the outsource work that we're doing. And that kind of cost duplication, I think, is one of the biggest risks in a younger company, sometimes saying, well, that's something that we don't have as much control or visibility to, and we're maybe a little less comfortable in that process, and then kind of adding in that level of resource. And to be honest with you, it often costs not just in dollars, but in time, because then there's someone else in that process kind of working through it. So kind of comes back to picking the right partner to begin with, finding someone who culturally you feel is a good fit, so that you don't have that desire to maybe kind of duplicate levels of management in that cost process.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like not just a culture fit, but trust. You need to be able to trust your partner. And so that's a big part of it is selecting the right partner. All right, well, we're going to say goodbye to our public audience on LinkedIn Live and YouTube. And we'll stick around with our cohort for some one-on-one or small group Q&A.